and lockdown and all that, everything is happening virtually. And project leadership is something, it's all about people and managing stakeholder. You know how important it is, right? And it is different. And you know, you sometimes you might be a good project manager, but not necessarily we can do uh, people management through virtually. And you know, the leadership skill and what does it take to do it virtually. So I'm so excited. I'm very thankful to Ganesan here, who are coming forward to share a very critical topic right now, which everyone is required. So I'll keep it short. That's all. Thank you. Please enjoy the rest of the talk. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Muthu. I guess without further ado, I'll pass it to Mr. Ganesan. Mr. Ganesan, have the floor now. All right, over to you.
Thanks, guys. Good morning, all. And again, as Muthu has stated, thank you for taking the time off on a weekend, Saturday, being an auspicious 8/8 date and all that. I'll jump into it very quickly. Basically, there are many roles that program project managers are asked to perform, from the traditional project delivery success to creating vision, the usual textbook definition of project management. But considering the situation today with the pandemic, the hardest role in leading people in times of crisis is, which is what we're all seeing now, is experiencing this particular impact of the pandemic and, of course, the way we work. People are being made redundant, businesses are in difficulty, projects are in distress in terms of timelines or schedules, and obviously, again, the budgets.
Mr. Ganesan, sorry to disturb you, we haven't seen your screen yet.
Oh, sorry. Can you all see it now?
Yep, can see the screen now.
All right. So basically in the talk today, I'm going to share some very, well, I'll call them tips and strategies, and I'll break them down to soft strategies, which I had to pick up very, very quickly while leading two large projects, basically in the cloud environment and also cybersecurity environment. Unfortunately, one of them was a distressed project to start with. But again, this pandemic, believe it or not, using some of the strategies that the team picked up together, we managed to move it along in terms of the progress. So moving on, here we have a situation where traditionally, you know, we're looking at shared office space, working face-to-face. Now, leading in a virtual environment is totally different, where, again, the skills are more important than they were previously. Many of us were brought up to leading teams that were right in front of us, shared the same office space. We got time to spend face-to-face, whether in the hallway or the pantry or wherever. But these days are now dim and distant, which is where the new normal kicks in, and it requires all of us to adapt a new approach. But at the same time, keeping the teams focused, accountable, empowered, and engaged. Accountable is a favorite word I keep using. And as project managers, you guys may have all come across the RACI matrix, which you may see, and I'm you know, forgive me, but I'm going to be somewhat blunt at certain points where some teams or some clients, when you start talking about the RACI matrix, people get quite defensive. But again, is the approach in terms of how that's put forward to the team, sponsors, especially sponsors, and all the clients. Command and control leadership styles never really worked, is my simple philosophy. I'll repeat that. Command and control leadership styles never really worked. And in this virtual environment today, it is definitely less effective. And the folks who rely on that type of approach or leadership style are really, really going to struggle. Now, in terms of empowerment, right, there's basically three key areas where, as a project manager, you clearly define the outcome you're looking for and leave the team to do it. So this goes to the other favorite phrase, micromanagement. Again, micromanagement, we are all guilty to an extent, but we need to be very conscious of how much that micromanagement is seeping in, because it can be very unconscious. And again, it's basically the trust from within the team, which will reflect trust in terms of the client's team and or the client sponsors. Second one is confirm that the team have the tools to do the job. Now, again, the tools in today's virtual environment, Zoom is a perfect example. Connectivity is another example. Data connectivity from a location, which is not the office location, where it's a lot more stable. So you're going to have situations where people are working from home. There may be a situation where connectivity may not be as good. So you're going to have interruptions. So these are the things which, again, need to be considered and allow for that particular individual to work with a different skill set, but not only managing by walking around and having impromptu face-to-face meetings, still be able to engage, inspire, and then motivate teams with no personal contact. Last one, give the team matching authority. When I say matching authority, it is extremely important, again, whether it's face-to-face, traditional, but even more important in the virtual environment, to figure out, you are the project manager, you have a peer as far as the client is concerned, but you're also going to have to manage the sponsor, who's obviously a lot more senior. But at the working level, in terms of the teams that you have, may they be team leads, specific subject matter experts, they have to have, or should have, ideally, peers within the client environment or the delivery environment. Recognition. Again, you start by recognizing effort. This, again, sounds very obvious. And again, situational leadership is something, is a situation which may work in one example, but does not work in another. So the toughest times to be a leader during the crisis is, again, these plus a few more qualities, 5 more really, which you will see in further slides, which allow for, again, start by recognizing effort, create quick wins. In other words, the low-hanging fruit to build momentum. Momentum is something that, as a project manager, you will notice there will be periods during a reporting cycle where things are moving along. Everything is nice, everything is moving along. Once you see that, keep that momentum running as quickly as possible, as consistently as possible. Obviously, projects will always hit a wall somewhere, whether it's a risk going into a delay, a risk going into a requirement. But once that's overcome, or rather cannot be overcome, look for low-hanging fruit where those quick wins again start building momentum. Last item here again is standard. We all do this. You report your progress frequently based on the project charter. Going into the 5 qualities that leaders need to demonstrate in times of crisis. Situational leadership, which I mentioned earlier, is something that works in one situation but may not work in another. Democratic leadership, as what I mentioned earlier. The types of leadership in terms of control, micromanagement. So these are the things that may or may not work. So from the perspective of being in a virtual environment, I personally think it's a lot more flexible. But again, if you're doing the control leadership type management, it's not going to work. Let me be very frank with that. Control leadership in a virtual environment is doomed to fail. In situational project leadership, the 5 items that I kept making reference to earlier is understanding, which means listening, calm, be in a solution mode, manage the panic. Because again, you pick a simple example in terms of access to a facility, access to a building for the construction type PMs, access to the physical structure that's being worked on will be, of course, delayed. There are going to be challenges, which means now work is going to be delayed. So again, that needs to be managed in a calm fashion. Confidence, in other words, you must project confidence. Don't allow for an issue where flexi hours versus on-site. And again, if we're looking at the construction, specifically the construction domain, the off-site versus on-site does not apply. It is obviously on-site. But any other domain in terms of project management, whether it's technology, the aviation area, I'll just pick on my my domains, which are going back into the technology domain, the aviation domain, and also the cybersecurity domain, which is technology. Yes, it is possible. Fourth one, honesty. Don't sugarcoat. We are all guilty. I'm also guilty, where in terms of reporting, whether it's the progress reporting, project reporting, and or within the teams, where there are risks, there are items which are not moving, but we tend to sugarcoat. My take on that very simply is, again, this goes back to traditional project management, and today in the virtual environment, be upfront, tell the right picture, show the right picture, paint the right picture. Last but not least, and the most important, direction, a clear message, and don't assume. This is the biggest perspective now with the virtual working environment, where there's a lot of unknowns. Decisions from a executive level, sponsorship level, may not be able to be made because of unknowns. Again, we go back to the pandemic. What about wave 2, wave 3? Is it going to happen? Will it happen? We don't know. That's going to have a direct impact on your project. Again, the working environment, the working situation. So here you have a clear message. Don't assume. If there's a risk, that needs to be planned ahead now and not wait for that to take place. But at least if the risk is planned and there is a mitigation, hypothetically, if it goes down south in terms of the pandemic, you already have a plan in place. I'd like to run a little poll now. And basically the question on that poll, could you help please, admin, to pull up the poll? So the poll basically, I hope you all can see it because I can't see it at the moment. It's basically saying there's no difference between remote working and working from home, true or false. Let's see the count on that one.
No, we can't see the poll yet.
Okay. Akmal, the poll, please.
Akmal, are you there? I hope he's not having some technical problem. Maybe we can proceed first, then once the poll ready.
Okay, all right. So anyway, so that means everybody can have this in the back of your head to think about. The statement being, or the poll being, there's no difference between remote working and working from home, true or false. When it pops up, we'll see what the count is like, right? We'll move on that one. So now in a recent study by IBM, example, just IBM as an example, 75% said they would like to continue working remotely. And on occasion, then 54% said they would like this to remain their primary way of working. That means don't go back to the old way of working. So you see, there are benefits on both sides. Whether for one, the employees cost less to work from home, and you don't waste time traveling to the office, and for the client sites. This obviously reduces things like infrastructure footprints, and you don't need the same office space when working, or people working from home. But then again, this is not all nice and pretty. It is not a bed of roses, because not every job can be done the same way. Example, again, the construction industry. This also may become sensitive in terms of, I'll use the word jealousy, where not everyone has a workable office space at home. A real life example, one of my own team leads on a current project, again, remote working, etc., etc. And I realized he kept pinging me at about 11 p.m. midnight on basically project line items. And I was like, wait a minute, why is he pinging me at this time of the day? So when I finally got on a call with him, I realized that during the day, the kids are at home, and he didn't have the luxury of a working space at home. With little kids running around, obviously there's interruption, there's a little bit of noise, etc., etc. And I told him no issues. I will just go ahead and have to take his calls at that 11 p.m. midnight type situation. So these are the things which we also need to understand as project managers, right? You have tons of people in your teams who may or may not have the same quote unquote luxury where they don't have the luxury of a nice space on the home front, which is a workable office space. So again, just to clarify, right? I hope everybody is clear. These are the 5 items that I'll be kind of going around during this 1 hour session. And they may seem basic, but it's amusing and amazing that in a virtual environment, we're focused on the tool that we're using. We're focused on staring into the screen that we're working on virtually. Whether the video is on or not is besides the point. But we kind of start missing the basics from a face-to-face environment. So the first one being understanding, right? You not only need to show a deep understanding of the problem, but also how it is impacting the people so that you know how they are feeling. That real life example is one of my own team, which I mentioned earlier, with little kids or young kids in the house, right? Now, this is again an awareness amongst teams members, and as a project manager, your role or your accountability and responsibility to be able to understand that and also be calm, because the better you understand them and their concerns, easier it will be to communicate in a way that will help them. If some of you, you may have heard of Stephen Covey, his famous statement, first seek to understand, then to be understood. The more understanding you have, the more empathy and compassion you can show. So again, totally different from a face-to-face in the office type environment. In that so-called virtual environment, remote working or working from home, you have other factors which are not readily visible to you as the project manager, because you're not in that person's home. You're not sitting in that coffee bean or Starbucks where that person is, or where the client is for that matter. Next one down is calm. No, you see, in terms of crisis, the worst thing that can happen is that people panic. Panic can always turn into a bad situation and maybe a catastrophe, right? So people need to believe that they will get through this and that they have chosen the right leader to guide them. And that right leader, being the project manager, is basically showing them, giving them confidence. You have confidence in the project, confidence in the team. I'll go back like a parrot to my earlier point, trust. Don't micromanage. And that you have to show that you believe that success will be that outcome. It can be difficult, I admit, especially when things are really tough. But you have to demonstrate that inner resolve. And I suppose use that word, show a strong backbone and present an air of calm. And as experienced project managers, even program directors, program managers, we all know there are situations in the duration of a project where things are just not going right. And they're screaming, yelling, and jumping, client is unhappy, etc., etc. But this is where that calm/confidence comes into play. Extremely important. So again, the confidence perspective, that people need to believe that they will get through this. People meaning your team. Because once your team feels that way, that quote unquote feeling will go across to the end client or the users and or the sponsors, because they know they've chosen the right leader to guide them through this. So to show them or give them that confidence, you have to project it. And to project that, you have to believe that the success will be, the final success of that project will be the final outcome, right? And again, you may see words here or keywords here, which I'll repeat from an earlier slide, like the next one, in terms of this nice word called honesty. Be as open and as honest as you can be. And again, not to be negative, not to be pessimistic, I have a simple belief, no matter how bad it is, or no matter how ugly it looks, you tell the client the story, don't sugarcoat. You're going to get hit. You're going to get smacked. There's going to be escalation. Things are not going to look good. You're going to have an unhappy client. But it's better to tell them up front than waiting 3 weeks or 3 months or 6 months down the road and say, oops, things are not going right. Because people's imaginations are often much worse than the reality. Sharing the truth is a blessing and helps people better prepare for a long struggle, which goes back to the basics of project management, right? Our risk management plan, issue logs. So we have all these tools, which is why project management is becoming more and more, has become, sorry, and is becoming more and more of a value across industries. Again, construction, may it be aviation, the medical industry, you name it, the technology industry. And that doesn't mean everything, you know, that applies across the board is the same. We have various types of people on this call. Types of people meaning different domains, I assume. But the basics in terms of these keywords that I'm playing around with is what I'm defining as the quote unquote soft areas, which if you use them as buzzwords on at the back of your mind when you're talking to your teams, the words called understanding, calm, confidence, honesty, and the next one being direction. Direction meaning, again, as I mentioned earlier, people are told, given clear direction. Ambiguity, confusion in a crisis can be a fatal mix. Just to digress for a little bit, as you can see, during the last, I guess, a month to 6 weeks, some of the announcements coming out from the various agencies in terms of the MCO, RMCO, they were confusing, but it got fixed very quickly in terms of the message being repeated to become clear, a bit more concise, and a bit more consistent. So remember always, people don't just listen to what you say, they also watch what you do. Now here's a big problem. Here's a big challenge. You're not there, you're virtual. So you're either on a video call or an audio call. So how are they going to watch what you do? So the only option there is being consistent in where you can demonstrate the understanding, the calm, the confidence, the honesty and direction, and consistency. The repeated approach will help your team, the organization, and your people come through. I hope that was a bit noisy and me talking a lot, but I hope that one is clear to everybody, because I really believe that one is, that last statement I made, I'll repeat it, right? That points of understanding, calm, confidence, honesty, and direction. It will help your teams, your organization, and your people come through successfully. And make it repeatable, please. Keep repeating it, where it just becomes like, oh yeah, okay, I remember this, I remember this. And again, the comfort level, believe it or not, will automatically kick in. Now, managing a project, as we all know, not easy. You got people, you got finances, you got times, you got equipment, materials, on an ongoing basis to ensure that the project is successful. The 5 items you see there are standard. I'll use the word PMBOK loosely, but again, these are standard governance models framework in terms of project management. But when we look at, let's take those 5 items, right? Finances is time. Let's just say on a weekly basis, it is all on track. You need to identify things that are slipping, running late, blah, 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 the usual stuff which you do anyways. But in order to reassign something to a more critical or non-critical to be reassigned to be delayed or done after the project is completed, How are we going to do that in a virtual environment? Resource allocation. Same thing. You're keeping a close watch on the percentage of time each of your team members are working. Now, it's virtual. How do you know if the person is doing 80% or 70%? Based on what you can see if they're on site. Next one down, progress and efficiency of the team. You can continuously track the progress of every team member and the efficiency. So it goes back to the earlier point, right? The timesheets, whatever tools that you're using to monitor these progress and the efficiency. In a virtual environment, sorry, take that back. In a face-to-face environment, we are tracking by tasks, the standard definition of projects. In a virtual environment, it's your call based on your projects. You know your projects better than anybody else. You either do it, you cannot do it task by task. That is impossible, and that will not work. Let me be very clear. What you need to try and figure out is you got tasks. Try and start tracking, or you must start tracking based on deliverables. So the task has an end result. Wait for that. You know when that's going to happen? You start tracking based on the end result or end product. So that makes life a lot easier where, again, you're not going into the micromanagement perspective. You don't have the luxury of face-to-face. You don't have the luxury of day-to-day. So you're just waiting for a task to be completed. And the risk there is if it slips, you will find out only when you wait for the deliverable. But again, you need to keep that on the percentage progress where everyone is making on his or her task to allow them to check how many have been completed on time. So not the task, but the end result. Then you got your risk issues and challenges, right? So you got your risk register running. Now, a great tip here is to try and resolve any issues as soon as they are found or identified. Standard, right? You come up with a mitigation plan. But now, back to the same thing. It's not face-to-face. You're not sitting there walking down the hallway or doing a walkabout management where that risk is not popping up as quickly as possible. But the tools don't change. The risk log is still running. Could be on a shared cloud service where you have access to it. But now you're not monitoring that risk on a day-to-day basis. You're waiting for the end result of the mitigation plan of that particular risk. Health checks on the projects. You've got your usual weekly reporting or monthly reporting, again, based on your projects. That too, based on the tools, look at the end or the final deliverable, not the week-to-week tracking, which can be very time-consuming and it becomes inefficient. And there's another topic which is not in my pack here, nor for this particular session. And it's basically, how do you manage a D-level task, right? A D-level task is basically a delegate level task. That means it needs to be delegated. In a virtual environment, that becomes even more critical as far as delegation. But I won't digress to that one at the moment. Moving on. The 5 things that you can do as a project program manager to help lead us through a crisis. You notice the words I'm using here are very, are repeated back and forth in terms of similarities. This thing called be honest or honesty, provide direction. That means, again, you know where you're going, you know where, you might not know, you might not know everything. There's still unknowns with the pandemic situation today. But we can still tell people or teams what we know and give them some direction. So hypothetically, let's just use a not so good example, but I'll use it anyways. A wave of wave 2 or wave 3 coming up, you have a situation where we don't know when, but we can plan for next week, right? So these are the situations where that item in terms of be honest, provide direction, be consistent, be calm and confident, be decisive is extremely, extremely important. Moving on, the FAST framework. I'm not going to, again, delve too much into this one, but again, it's keywords, right? And I think it's important in terms of these keywords, whether you want to call it the FAST framework, which is focus, accountability, simplicity, and transparency. And then the previous one going into the be honest, don't sugarcoat, provide direction, be consistent, be calm, confident, be sensitive, be decisive. So these are all terminologies, right? You may not, I don't, it's your call whether you're going to use the same wordings, the same buzzwords, but play around with the words and keep it repeatable with your teams. They're soft words, right? Hypothetically, you say accountability. Now that's a sensitive word. Someone's going to say, what do you mean accountable? What do you mean responsible? What do you mean consult, inform, straightforward? But accountable and responsible sometimes become gray amongst team members. So this is where, like it or not, don't assume, be very, very clear with it. And more so in today's virtual environment. So just to quickly run through this FAST framework. So focus meaning distinguish between the right job, prioritize, don't overextend the team, the resources. Now this don't overextend team, the resources is again, a good example, a perfect example is the one I gave you earlier with one of my own leads, where the assumption on overextend is, why is this guy working so late at night? Doesn't make sense. And as far as I'm concerned, we're working remotely, work from home, working virtually, whatever. But when I dug it up and found out the real reason behind it, it was basically, oh, okay, it's not overextend, but it's something that he has to do, which he was okay with. So be very cautious of that, be very conscious of that with your team members. And again, keep an eye on the outcome, the end prize. Outcome meaning not the task. At the task level, it can become extremely painful and time consuming if you're going to be monitoring the task in a virtual environment. Monitor the outcome. Accountability. So here again, I'm playing with that word, going back to accountability or the RACI matrix, R's and the A's. Unaccountability, the benefits of responsibility to prioritize your own success meaning the project success, but it begins with the individual. Individual meaning the person accountable and or the person responsible. So ensure that's clear cut within your team structure. S is basically simplicity. Here I'm talking about clear communication. Please do not underestimate this. I've gone into large programs where communications management did not even exist within the project plan. Now that is extremely, extremely dangerous and undervalued in terms of communications management. For simple fact, we talk about the traditional projects, you got your kickoffs, then you got your weekly progress meetings, etc., the standard stuff. That's communication management. But who is running communication as a vertical for the duration of the project? So again, that as long as it's there and it's simple, it builds confidence within the team. Simplicity, I consider, is power. Keep it simple, short message, but repeatable, and you keep repeating the same message using example FAST, where you're saying focus, 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 simplicity, 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 or transparency, transparency, transparency. Just as examples, right? Now, the last one, transparency, you need to understand or must understand how to track and report performance. So here again, where I'm coming from is the understanding on how to track and report the performance is keeping it as simple as possible. Let me just play around with these words. And in terms of reporting performance, the accountability, the ownership, and also the responsibility. And again, what are you reporting? Keep it focused. If you're reporting on a particular topic within a project or a sub-project within a program, you focus on that. You're not talking about anything else. And this, again, is easier said than done, as we all know, where you're doing a face-to-face progress reporting, status reporting meeting, and it gets sidelined because some other issue or item or risk has popped up, and the whole session gets diverted or sidetracked. So this is where, again, once there's transparency in there, believe it or not, in terms of the audience, may it be the client and or your own project teams, they will see like, okay, this is the way it is, really. Let's focus on that. But that ownership or accountability of focusing goes back to the project manager. Don't expect the team to drive or manage that. Muthu, I'm not sure if there's any questions. Muthu? Okay, just to quickly run through the points that I've been going back and forth with is culture. Now, this is the most important impact on the performance of a project team. Now, this is again a different topic, but I'd just like to close off this particular session with these two words here, culture and listening. But when when you're going into culture and listening, you're going into earning the trust, building the culture. You've heard of EQ, you've heard of IQ. Simple fact, having lunch with your teams, you can't do that anymore. Tell people their work matters, you can. Be a player coach, yes you can. Feedback in private, praise in public, yes you can. In victory, you're leading. In crisis, you're leading from the front. Communicate intent. That means you're being very clear with your message. And from a listening perspective, the safe environment. Safe environment meaning the plus point of working virtually nowadays is exactly what we're facing right now, what we're doing on this particular session, right? We're not face-to-face. Hypothetically, example, I'm not on video, so you can't see me, I can't see you. But now we're using one sense, which is what we're listening. I'm doing the talking, you're listening. So there's no distractions. But is this considered a safe environment? So if we got the little chat box on the side there, some of you may want to shoot a question across to each other or a chat amongst each other or to me or vice versa. We can do that. Whereas if we're face-to-face sitting in a room and the person is presenting and someone is chatting on the side and or fiddling with their tablet or their phone, that becomes, I would consider, an unsafe environment. And of course, if someone needs to say something or raise an issue or a risk, they may or may not do it in that environment. So this is where, I mean, when you're listening to your teams, ensure that safe environment is in place. Eye contact, of course, clear all distraction, which is the same thing I was talking about earlier. Understand the substance, ask questions. I was on a call some weeks ago, and someone in the audience made a point. Oh, I can't question the sponsor. This is coming from the project manager. And my point was, but what are you trying to ask the sponsor? He's like, why are we doing this project? I said, there you go. You have every right as the project manager to ask the sponsor, whether it's the client sponsor or the delivery organization sponsor, why are we doing this project? They will have the answer. So don't feel, I guess, cited for asking the question, because you are accountable to deliver it, which means you need to understand why that particular project is taking place. Fourth one down is observing non-verbal clues. Here again, you have a challenge because non-verbal clues make up nearly 80% of communication. Look at us right now. I'm talking, but you can't see me. So that's a downside. Whereas if I'm talking to you face to face, if I have my video on, you can see my reaction, I can see yours. But in this particular situation today, we're doing it over whether it's Zoom or GoToMeeting, video may not be there. So the nonverbal clues become a bigger challenge, which means listening. You can't see, you need to listen. And also understand the emotions and feelings within the environment as far as the team is concerned. So here again, a good pickup would be, in this particular situation, everybody is muted. But when you're on your project team calls, not necessarily everyone is muted or the control of muting. So there'll be background noises, kids running around, a dog barking. It could be anything. So here's my perspective in terms of understanding the emotions and feelings while you're running with the team. Last but not least, help the team see the issue in a different light. In other words, I'll go back to my latest example where one of my leads, again, with the kids running around, and he was very frustrated, right? He kept saying, boss, it's going to be extremely difficult, blah, blah, blah. I can't work during the day, the kids, blah, blah, blah. And I turned it around and told him, I said, you know what? How old are your kids? Yeah, I think he said 9 and I think it was 6 and 9. Anyway, I told him, you know what? Look at all this as a blessing because now you're spending quality time with your kids at home. Whereas under normal circumstances, that 9 to 5, you're in the office, they're at home or they're in school. But now they can't go to school because they're home. So they're home. So take it all as a blessing, which means, you put it back across as in a different light. And he was like, hey, yeah, you're right. So jokingly, what I also told him was, when your kids become 17, 18, then you say, get out of the house. But again, from a project manager, leader perspective, help the team see that particular issue in a different light. Muthu, Iqbal, any questions that I can take?
Yep, there is a question. You want to provide some suggestion on how do you celebrate success during this period?
How do you say? Okay, again, good point. When you're looking at this period meaning this pandemic situation, now we can't get together face to face to celebrate, right? What I found, let's take what we're doing right now. Okay, this particular talk, it's kind of formal, informal, if you want to call it that. There's nothing stopping you doing the same thing using Zoom and or any of the available tools with the teams to do the same thing in terms of nobody is on mute, everybody's video is on, and get a lot of noise and making whatever comments that need to be made. So you see here again, right? Is that acceptable? Is that good enough? The famous makan, the famous whatever, it could be a mama shop, whatever. You can't do that. But you can still do that in terms of whether it's from home and or someone actually sitting at a mama without being harassed because of MCO. I'm not sure if that's the ideal, but as a leader, to celebrate that success, I personally think it boils down to, let's say in a victory, right? It's a success. You as a project manager, you're leading from the back, not the front. Now, when it becomes a crisis, that means it's not a success. You are in front. So you're the leader. So just ensure in the crisis of that particular project or duration, you are up front, you're standing up in front of the team. In victory, you sit in the back and let them have the fun. I hope that answered the question.
Okay. Personally, what I did was that I actually remotely send food to my guys just every now and then when there's something to celebrate, and they're happy. All right. Let's go to another question. Another question is how to keep stakeholders' expectation always in check when things are not coming on so well.
So it goes back to my earlier point, right? Repeatable, clear, and concise, and honesty. So now the sponsor, I'll just use that particular question as an example. The sponsor is obviously, I'm assuming, not happy with something. So that problem statement's been raised, escalated, whatever. As a project manager, you have basically been able to find out the root cause of that problem statement. You also have a plan or a solution. Now, basically, that needs to be communicated. This is the problem. And like I said, it can be, I'll use the word dangerous, because now we're saying the problem statement is coming back from a particular, I don't know, logistical point or a people point or even a material point. Someone may get into trouble, example, right? But you're just making that statement to say that's the problem statement. And here's a solution, and we're going to be doing this. And repeat that same problem statement keyword until it is closed. So the sponsor now, he or she is listening to you and says, yeah, he's figured it out, she's figured it out, but we're talking the same thing. Where's my solution? When are you going to make it go away? But you have that plan. But that plan could take 2 days, or it could take 2 months, or it could take 2 weeks to fix. Keep repeating the problem statement. Keep the message concise and clear. Hope that answers the question.
Yep. Floor is open. Anyone have any more questions to ask to Mr. Ganesan? Well, actually, I have one question, though I'm not sure whether it's a question or remark. I'm just sharing you my experience. Myself working in this current environment virtually is common thing. But one thing I noticed is like, which I could relate, is that it's very hard for me to get connected to my team. I mean, I started getting to know them virtually, and until now, I would say I have yet to meet all my team members. And sometimes when I was doing my project, that does pose some problems, because we are connected virtually, so there are certain limitations on what do I know about them. For example, if I want to make them do something or buy into my ideas, or for them to share meeting, there's a little bit of distancing that still exists until now, despite months working with them. I mean, this, apart from what you have earlier shared, any cues or anything that we would like to share with us that would help in bridging that communication?
Let me maybe answer that in a different context, right? When this is before COVID and before the pandemic and all that. Actually, it was last year, where my teams were multi-regional. So obviously here in Malaysia, in Europe, and also in Australia. Now, for me, working with multi-region teams, those 3 areas or continents, no issue. The biggest headache starts when you have a team sitting out in the US. Then your time zones just go absolutely upside down. So if I use that context, if you don't mind, right? So you got 3 different or 2 different, doesn't matter, 2 or 3 different teams in different time zones and locations. What I basically did was I said, there's no way I'm going to get everybody in the same place at the same time. So bear in mind, now this is before the COVID pandemic situation. We're working as per normal. Basically what I did was broke them up in terms of only for the first, I think, if I'm not mistaken, first I think it was the first 2 or 3 weeks where I had separate calls with the different regions to their time zone. In other words, their comfortable time zone, not comfortable for me. But I also made it clear, I say, guys, you know what, it's 2 a.m. my time, but let's get on this call and get this over with. Now, see, that built a little bit more in terms of the player-coach or coach-player, I guess, thinking, where they were like, oh, okay, this guy didn't mind 2 a.m. But I also made it clear that I'm not going to make this a habit. I'm not going to be up at 2 a.m. every week for our progress calls for the next 6 months. So they, again, understood the second bullet point on the slide, the emotions and the feelings, but it was coming from me to them. I don't mind, but I'm not going to do it all the time. Where they started volunteering to say, no problem, we'll do it at 7 a.m. local time or 11 p.m. local time. So it's a matter of a give and take scenario where that coach-player, player-coach item kicks in. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, we are good with that. Coming back to the floor, anything else the floor would like to ask Mr. Ganesan before we wrap up? All right, I think if there are no more questions, allow me to wrap up the session for today. Thank you again to Mr. Ganesan for sharing his insight, his expertise, his experience on this one. Before we go back, allow me to do this a little bit. All right. Okay, here are the upcoming webinars. Today is the 8th of August. The upcoming webinars are highlighted in this slide. And if everybody can see, there are a couple of boxes, TBA to be announced, 22nd October, 7th of November, and also some events in November as well. Those are the upcoming talks. We are still in discussion with the speakers, but the dates are more or less confirmed. All right. Now, our thank you. We will be sending this certification to Mr. Ganesan later. Thank you for being with us today. All right. And last but not least, feedback session. Appreciate if you guys can, I know 3D scanning barcodes is a norm these days, and I'm also taking this opportunity to do this by feedback by the code as well. But don't worry if you don't want to snapshot the image on screen. We will also be sending the feedback session response via email to everyone. Okay, without further ado, let me just say thanks to Mr. Ganesan. Thank you very much to everyone. I hope everybody will enjoy their weekend, and we look forward to see everyone again in the near future. All right, thank you everyone. Have a good weekend. Thank you, Mr. Ganesan.
Thank you. Take care now. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.